When preparing our tray for a tap and inject procedure, the first thing we do is collect all the items that we'll need for the procedure. The list of items includes proparacaine, betadine, a speculum, lidocaine, as well as an alcohol wipe to cleanse the surface of the container. A 1 cc syringe, which we will initially attach to a larger gauge needle to draw up the lidocaine. We are careful to use sterile technique so as not to touch the hub of the syringe or the hub of the needle to any other surfaces. We then draw up 1 cc of lidocaine. We then switch from the large gauge needle to a 30 gauge needle on the 1 cc syringe. Next on the tray, we have our 27 gauge needle and a 3 cc syringe, which we will use for our vitreous tap. We also have a 30 gauge needle on a 1 cc syringe in the event of needing to do an AC tap. Additionally, we have a cap for our syringe for when our specimen is prepared, an additional 1 cc syringe which we will use to mark without a needle, and lastly our prepared intravitreal injection for the end of the procedure. When preparing an eye for a tap and inject procedure, we initially give proparacaine. This is followed by betadine. We then place a speculum. We then give a subconjunctival injection of 0.5 to 1 cc of lidocaine for anesthesia. We do this in the area of our anticipated tap and inject. After the lidocaine has been in place for 5 to 10 minutes, we mark the eye with a 1 cc needleless syringe. We then place a drop of betadine over the mark to highlight it. The outer edge of the mark should give us a distance of roughly 4 millimeters posterior to the limbus. Next, we attempt to get a vitreous sample using a 27 gauge needle on a 3 cc syringe. We enter the eye aiming posteriorly at the posterior edge of our mark. We carefully generate vacuum in our attempt to obtain a vitreous sample of roughly 0.1 to 0.3 cc. If the vitreous tap is unsuccessful, we then switch to a 1 cc syringe on a 30 gauge needle and attempt to get an anterior chamber tap. We enter the eye inferiorly with the bevel of the needle pointed up, being very careful to avoid contact with the iris or the lens. We enter in the horizontal plane so as to not point towards the iris or the lens as we carefully remove our sample of 0.1 to 0.2 cc. We then obtain the cap for our specimen, again being very careful so as not to contaminate the cap itself or the specimen. After successfully obtaining our sample, we then prepare for an intravitreal injection. Be careful so as to inject the appropriate volume depending on the agent you are injecting into the vitreous cavity. In this case, we are injecting 0.1 cc's.